This is the story of how my empire was stolen, how I was reduced to nothing, and how I learned that the most valuable currency in the world isn't money, it's the kindness of a stranger. It's the story of my fall and my redemption. And it begins, as so many tragedies do, on a day that seemed like any other. My name is Alexander Croft. Before we move any further, comment below, where are you watching from? So let's continue my story. For the first 42 years of my life, I believed the world was a ledger. A balance sheet of assets and liabilities, wins and losses, all governed by the cold, elegant logic of commerce. I built an empire, Croft Global, from a university dorm room idea into a multinational conglomerate. My worth was measured in billions, my influence in headlines, and my home in penthouse suites that scraped the heavens. I trusted the numbers. They never lied. But people do. The greatest miscalculation of my life was a single line item on my personal balance sheet, listed under Assets. Julian Vance, my chief operating officer, my right hand for 15 years, the man I considered a brother. He was the architect of my operational success, the smiling, competent face that assured me everything was under control. I gave him power, autonomy, and a fortune in stock options. I never thought to check the column where he truly belonged: liabilities. This is the story of how my empire was stolen, how I was reduced to nothing, and how I learned that the most valuable currency in the world isn't money, it's the kindness of a stranger. It's the story of my fall and my redemption. And it begins, as so many tragedies do, on a day that seemed like any other. It was a Tuesday. The sky over Manhattan was a hard, brilliant blue, the kind that makes the steel and glass of the city look like a masterpiece of human ambition. I was in the back of the Bentley, scrolling through pre-market reports on my tablet. A merger with the Korean tech giant, Sagen Industries, was in its final, delicate stages. It was the crowning achievement of my career, a deal that would solidify Croft Global for the next century. My phone buzzed. Julian. Alex, we need to talk. The Sagen numbers, there's a discrepancy, a big one. I've found something in the offshore accounts. It looks like embezzlement. We need to handle this quietly, before the board gets wind of it. His voice was a tight coil of urgency. My own heart hammered against my ribs. Embezzlement? On a deal of this magnitude? It could scuttle everything. Where are you? I asked, my voice clipped. The old warehouse on West, 55th, the one we're liquidating. It's secure, no IT, no ears. I've got the files. We need to decide our move before the market opens. It made a twisted kind of sense. Julian was always cautious. I'm on my way. I instructed my driver, Henry, to change course. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, a flicker of concern in his eyes. Sir, that's a deserted area. Are you sure? Just drive, Henry. The warehouse was a hulking skeleton of red brick and grimy windows, a relic of the industrial past I'd helped render obsolete. The air inside was thick with the smell of dust and decay. My footsteps echoed in the cavernous space. Julian stood under a single, dangling light bulb, a briefcase at his feet. He looked pale, but then the fluorescent light was unforgiving. Julian, what the hell is this? I demanded, striding towards him. That's when I saw it. The shift in his eyes. The concern melted away, replaced by a flat, cold emptiness. It was the look a predator gives its prey a second before the strike. It's the end of the line, Alex, he said, his voice devoid of all its familiar warmth. From the shadows behind steel pillars, 3 men emerged. They were large, dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, their faces hard and impersonal. They moved with a chilling efficiency that spoke of professional violence. My blood ran cold. Julian, what is this? This is a hostile takeover, he said, a thin smile playing on his lips. The most personal kind. You see, I'm tired of being the loyal dog, fetching your sticks while you reap all the rewards. Croft Global is mine. It has been, for months. I've been moving the pieces while you were busy playing Titan of industry. The betrayal was a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. You're insane. The board, the shareholders, will be told that Alexander Croft, overwhelmed by the pressure of the Sagen deal and facing personal financial ruin due to his own secret gambling debts, disappeared. A tragic story. The stock will dip, of course, but I'll be there to steady the ship. I've already forged the documents. Set up the offshore accounts in your name. It's all very convincing. I lunged at him, a raw, animalistic surge of fury. But one of the men was faster. A sharp, brutal pain exploded in the back of my head. The world tilted, the single light bulb fracturing into 1,000 stars before everything went black. The next thing I knew was the cold, a deep, pervasive chill that seeped into my bones. I was moving, the rumble of an engine beneath me. A van. My hands were bound behind my back. A coarse sack was over my head, filling my nostrils with the smell of burlap and my own fear. I could hear the low murmur of voices. Dump the body in the Hudson. Weights are in the back. The boss wants it clean, no traces. Don't worry. The river doesn't give back its secrets. Julian's voice cut through the darkness. Make sure of it. The transfer is complete. Your payment is waiting. Panic, pure and undiluted, gave me a strength I didn't know I possessed. The van hit a bump, and I rolled, slamming against the side. I kicked out blindly, connecting with something solid. A grunt of pain. I scrambled, my bound hands searching for a purchase. My fingers brushed against a sharp, metallic edge, a loose piece of trim on the van's interior. I sawed my wrists against it, the plastic zip ties digging into my skin. I could feel warm blood trickling down my hands. I didn't care. The voices were rising, angry. The van swerved. With a final, desperate wrench, the ties snapped. I tore the sack from my head. The van's interior was dark. One of the men was climbing over the seats towards me, his face a mask of fury. The back doors were my only chance. I fumbled for the handle, my slick, bloody fingers slipping. He grabbed my ankle. I kicked back with my free foot, connecting with his jaw. He roared in pain, his grip loosening. I found the latch, pulled, the doors flew open. We were on a highway, trees a dark blur on either side. The cold night air whipped into the van. It was a choice between certain death with these men and a probable death on the asphalt. I chose probability. I launched myself out into the roaring darkness. The impact was a universe of pain. I hit the road and tumbled, a rag doll thrown from a speeding car. Gravel tore at my clothes and skin. I rolled into a ditch, the wind knocked out of me, my body screaming in protest. I heard the van's brakes screech, saw its red taillights recede, then stop. They were coming back. Adrenaline overrode the agony. I crawled on my belly, dragging myself through the muddy, freezing water of the ditch into the relative cover of the woods. I pushed myself deeper into the undergrowth, thorns tearing at my face and hands, until I collapsed behind a fallen log, my body shaking uncontrollably. I heard their voices, cursing, the beam of a flashlight cutting through the trees. Forget it. He's gone. The boss said no loose ends, but if he's out here, he's dead anyway. Let the animals have him. You sure? Look at this place. He's in 1,000 pieces. Come on. Their footsteps receded. The engine started again, and the sound faded away, leaving only the sigh of the wind through the bare branches. I was alone, beaten, bleeding, and betrayed. Alexander Croft, the billionaire, was gone. All that was left was a body, broken and bleeding in the dirt. I don't know how long I lay there. Time lost all meaning. It was a cycle of shivering unconsciousness and sharp, painful wakefulness. The expensive wool of my Brioni suit was soaked and filthy, a pathetic insulator against the cold. My wallet, phone, watch all gone, taken by Julian's men. My identity had been stripped from me as efficiently as my fortune. I was a ghost. Driven by a primal need for warmth, I stumbled through the woods. Dawn was breaking, a gray, miserable light that did little to lift my spirits. I eventually emerged onto a road, not the highway, but a smaller 2-lane country route. The sign said, "Welcome to Cedar Creek. Population 8,402. I'd never heard of it. I must have been a horrifying sight. My face was a mosaic of cuts and bruises, my clothes torn and caked in mud and blood. I walked with a limp, my entire body, a symphony of pain. Cars slowed, drivers staring with a mixture of fear and disgust before speeding up again. I was a problem they didn't want to solve. The world I had once commanded now saw me as refuse. The humiliation was a poison worse than the physical agony. I found myself on the outskirts of the town, where the neat houses gave way to trailer parks and auto body shops. The hunger was a sharp, gnawing animal in my gut. I hadn't eaten in over a day. I saw a dumpster behind a diner, the smell of rotting food both repulsive and irresistible. I was actually considering it. Alexander Croft, scavenging from a dumpster. That's when I saw him. An old man, hunched over a shopping cart filled with scrap metal and discarded cans. He had a grizzled beard, a worn-out jacket, and eyes that had seen too many hard winters. He was picking through the trash with a methodical patience. Our eyes met. I expected the same recoil I'd gotten from everyone else, but his gaze was different. It held no fear, no judgment, just a quiet, weary assessment. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice a dry rasp. I could only manage a grunt, my throat too dry for words. He nodded, as if my state was a perfectly normal occurrence. "City fella, huh? Got rolled, I reckon." He fished a relatively clean-looking bottle of water out of his cart and held it out to me. "Here, you look parched." I took it with trembling hands, drinking greedily. It was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted. "Name's Elijah," he said. "Elijah Jones. You got a name?" Did I? Who was I now? "Al," I croaked, the first syllable of my name that felt safe. "Just Al." "Well, just Al," Elijah said, a faint smile touching his lips. "You look like you could use a hot meal and a place to get warm. My place ain't much, but it's got a roof. And it's better than the ditch you probably slept in last night." I was too broken to refuse, too proud to accept. But survival is a powerful motivator. I nodded, a wave of shame washing over me. "Don't you go getting all proud on me," Elijah said, as if reading my mind. "We all need a hand sometimes. Today's my turn. Tomorrow might be yours." He led me to a small, dilapidated trailer tucked away behind a grove of trees. It was rusted. The wooden steps leading up to the door were rotten. Inside, it was cramped, but immaculately clean. There was a small kitchenette, a worn armchair, and a bed in the corner. The air smelled of wood smoke and cheap coffee. "Bathroom's through there," he said, pointing to a narrow door. "Get cleaned up. I'll heat some soup." I stood under a trickle of lukewarm water, watching the grime and blood swirl down the drain. The man in the mirror was a stranger, hollow-eyed, gaunt, and bearded. The sharp, commanding features of Alexander Croft were buried under swelling and stubble. It was a perfect disguise. I emerged, wearing a pair of Elijah's old sweatpants and a flannel shirt that hung loosely on my frame. He had laid out a bowl of steaming chicken noodle soup and a thick slice of bread on a small formica table. I ate like a wolf, the simple food a feast. Elijah sat in his armchair, sipping coffee, watching me without intrusion. "You don't have to tell me nothing," he said finally. "But if you're running from trouble, you should know. This town, it's small. People talk. You'll need work if you aim to stay." "Work?" I mumbled through a mouthful of bread. The concept was alien. I hadn't applied for a job in 25 years. "Yeah, work. For money. To eat." He said it without condescension, a simple statement of fact. "I do odd jobs. Scrap metal. The auto shop down the road, Joe's. He sometimes needs a pair of hands. I can put in a word. It's not glamorous, but it's honest." And so, Alexander Croft, master of the universe, became Al, the odd job man. Elijah introduced me to Joe, a burly, no-nonsense man who looked me up and down and said, "You look like hell, but if Eli vouches for you, you're all right. Can you change a tire?" I had no idea, but I learned. I learned to haul scrap, to mop floors, to fix engines. The work was back-breaking. My hands became calloused and permanently stained with grease. I earned a few dollars an hour, enough to contribute to Elijah's meager groceries. I slept on a thin mattress on the floor of the trailer. The days bled into weeks. The initial paralyzing fear of Julian finding me slowly subsided, replaced by the grinding reality of poverty. I followed the news on the small, flickering television in Elijah's trailer. The story was everywhere. Billionaire Alexander Croft vanishes. Croft global stock plummets. Gambling debts and embezzlement. Suspected in Croft disappearance. Julian was masterful. He gave tearful press conferences, expressing his deep concern for his dear friend Alex. He was the steady hand at the helm, the loyal lieutenant holding the fort. He was praised for his resilience. The sheer, brazen audacity of it made me sick with rage. But living with Elijah was a different kind of education. He was a man who had nothing, yet shared everything. He had been a carpenter once, before a back injury and medical bills wiped him out. He never complained. He found dignity in his work. joy in a shared meal, solace in the quiet of the evening. He was the poorest man I had ever met, and yet, in his own way, he was rich. One evening as we shared a can of beans, I asked him, "Elijah, after all life has thrown at you, how are you not bitter?" He looked at me, his eyes soft. "Bitterness is a poison you drink hoping the other fellow will die, Al. I decided a long time ago I wasn't going to let the hard times steal my soul. I got my health, such as it is. I got this roof, and I got a friend to share my beans with. That's more than enough." His words struck a chord deep within me. I'd spent my life acquiring things, building walls of wealth to protect myself. But those walls had been paper thin. They were torn down in a single night by a man I trusted. Elijah's strength, his resilience, came from within. It was a fortress no one could breach. I started to change. The arrogant, impatient billionaire began to fade. Al was quieter, more observant, more humble. I listened to people. I learned the value of $1, the warmth of a simple kindness. The rage was still there, a burning coal in my heart, but it was now tempered by a new understanding. I didn't just want my empire back. I needed to become the man who deserved to get it back. Months passed. I had saved a few $100s, a pittance by my old standards, but a small fortune to me. I used it to take a bus to the next town over, where I wouldn't be recognized, and visited a public library. Using a computer for the first time in half a year felt like stepping into a time machine. I created a new encrypted email address. I had one card left to play. One person I prayed was still loyal. Sarah Bennett, my personal attorney. She was fiercely intelligent, impeccably discreet, and had handled my most sensitive affairs for a decade. More importantly, she had never fully trusted Julian. I typed a short, simple message from a place of desperate hope. "Sarah, the oak tree in Central Park where we had lunch. The acorn does not fall far. I am alive. Need your eyes only. A." The reference was obscure, a lunch meeting years ago where we'd discussed a competitor and I'd joked about acorns and oak trees. If Julian was monitoring her communications, it would look like spam. If it was her, she would understand. For 3 days, I checked the email obsessively from the library, my heart pounding each time. On the 4th day, there was a reply. "My God. The oak stands. The forest is diseased. The forester is a wolf in sheep's clothing. I am being watched. Secure line, provide a number." S. Relief, so potent it made me dizzy, washed over me. She was still on my side. I bought a cheap, prepaid burner phone with my meager savings and sent her the number. The call came an hour later. "Alex?" Her voice was a tense whisper. "My God, is it really you?" "It's me, Sarah," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "Tell me everything." The story she told was worse than I could have imagined. Julian had consolidated power with breathtaking speed. He'd forced through the Cygen deal on terms far more favorable to him, selling off key assets of my company for quick cash. He'd moved billions into a labyrinth of offshore accounts, systematically looting the empire I'd built. He'd fired anyone loyal to me and installed his own sycophants. He was living in my penthouse, using my art collection as collateral for loans. "He's destroying everything, Alex," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "He's claiming you authorized all of it before you disappeared. The board is terrified, the shareholders are in an uproar, but he has them boxed in with legal maneuvers and threats. He's untouchable." "He's not," I said, the old steel returning to my voice. "I need evidence, Sarah. The embezzlement, the forgeries, the attempted murder. It's all there, but it's buried deep. He's covered his tracks well, and Alex, he's dangerous. The men he hired, they're not just thugs. They're ex-military, private security. He's paranoid. He has security with him 24/7. I need you to be my eyes and ears," I instructed. "Don't take any risks. Gather what you can digitally. Find a weakness. There's always a weakness." Over the next few weeks, from the silent, snowy confines of Cedar Creek, I began my counterattack. With Sarah feeding me information, I started to see the cracks in Julian's armor. He was greedy, and greed makes you reckless. He was moving too fast, trying to strip the company bare before anyone could stop him. He had made a fatal error. He had alienated the very people who could bring him down, the mid-level accountants and IT staff who actually ran the company and knew where the bodies were buried. Using my new, hard-earned understanding of how regular people thought and felt, I dictated a plan to Sarah. We would target the disgruntled employees. We would offer them not money, but justice and protection. We would appeal to their loyalty, not to a faceless corporation, but to the idea of the company I had built. A company that, for all its faults, had valued its people. Meanwhile, my life with Elijah continued. He knew I was hiding from something, but he never pried. One night, I came back from the library, my mind buzzing with plans, to find him looking at me thoughtfully. "You're getting ready to leave, aren't you, Al?" he said. I was taken aback. "What makes you say that?" "You got that look about you, like a storm gathering. You've been making calls, spending time in that library. You're not running anymore. You're getting ready to fight." I couldn't lie to him, not after all he'd done. "Yes, Elijah, I am." He nodded slowly. "I figured you were somebody. Before, you got that way about you. Even when you were half dead in that ditch, you had a fire in your eyes." He paused. "Whatever it is you gotta do, you be careful. And you remember what you learned here. A man ain't what he owns. He's what he does." Tears welled in my eyes. This man, who had given me everything he had, was now giving me his blessing. "Elijah," I said, my voice choked, "when this is over, I'm going to repay you. I swear it." He waved a dismissive hand. "You already have, Al." The company was getting lonely. The final piece fell into place a week later. Sarah called, her voice electric with excitement. "We found it, Alex. One of Julian's own security detail. A man named Miller. He's been disgruntled since Julian shorted him on a bonus. He's willing to talk. He has recordings. Julian talking about the kidnapping, about the plan to kill you. He's our smoking gun." It was time. I had saved enough for a bus ticket to New York. I packed the few belongings I had, the clothes Elijah had given me. On the morning I left, I turned to him. The trailer was warm, filled with the smell of coffee. "Elijah," I said, extending my hand, "I can never thank you enough. You saved my life." He shook my hand, his grip still firm. "You saved your own life, Al. I just gave you a place to do it. Now go. Do what you gotta do." I left Cedar Creek as Al, the odd job man. But Alexander Croft was stirring, awakened by the embers of vengeance and tempered by the humility of survival. Returning to New York was like stepping onto a different planet. The noise, the pace, the sheer scale of it was overwhelming. I felt like a ghost walking through my former life. I checked into a cheap motel under the name Al Jones, a quiet tribute to the man who had saved me. My first meeting was with Sarah in a secure private room she had rented under a false name. When she saw me, she gasped. The beard, the weathered skin, the lean frame. I was a shadow of my former self. "My God, Alex," she whispered, hugging me tightly. "What did he do to you?" "He made me stronger," I said simply. "We gotta work." With Sarah's legal expertise and the evidence from the security guard, Miller, we built an airtight case. We reached out to the board members Julian had bullied, the shareholders he had cheated. We presented them with the truth. The reaction was a mixture of shock, outrage, and fear. But seeing me alive, hearing the recorded proof of Julian's treachery, galvanized them. We planned our move for the next quarterly board meeting. Julian would be at his most confident, surrounded by his lackeys, ready to present another set of lies about the company's strong performance under his steady leadership. The day of the meeting, I put on a suit Sarah had procured for me. It felt strange, constricting after months of loose, comfortable work clothes. I looked at myself in the mirror. The man staring back was a hybrid, the sharp, determined eyes of Alexander Croft set in the weathered face of Al. It was a face that knew both boardrooms and back-breaking labor. I walked into the Croft Global headquarters for the first time in nearly a year. The receptionist, a new hire, didn't recognize me. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked. "I'm here for the board meeting," I said, my voice calm. I rode the elevator to the top floor, my heart a steady drumbeat. I could hear Julian's voice before I even entered the boardroom, smooth and arrogant. "And so, despite the unfortunate circumstances surrounding our founder, Croft Global is stronger than ever. My restructuring plan has—" I pushed the doors open. The room fell silent. 20 faces turned to me, a gallery of shock, disbelief, and dawning hope. Julian was standing at the head of the table, pointer in hand, frozen. The color drained from his face. He looked like he had seen a ghost. For him, he had. "Hello, Julian," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I believe you were just discussing my company." "Alex," he stammered, taking a step back. This is impossible." "Is it?" I walked slowly towards the head of the table. "It's amazing what's possible when you have friends. Unlike you, I have real ones." I turned to the board. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for my absence. I was the victim of a violent kidnapping and attempted murder, orchestrated by the man standing before you." I nodded to Sarah, who activated a large screen. Miller's recorded voice, followed by Julian's, filled the room. "The body?" Miller's voice asked. "The Hudson. Make sure he's never found." Julian's voice cold and unmistakable. The room erupted. Julian's facade crumbled. Panic seized him. "It's a lie! A forgery! He's an imposter!" But it was too late. As he shouted, the doors opened again. Federal agents, accompanied by NYPD officers, filed into the room. "Julian Vance," the lead agent said, "you are under arrest for kidnapping, attempted murder, securities fraud, embezzlement, and a host of other charges." They handcuffed him. As they led him away, he stared at me, his eyes filled with a venomous hatred. "You were supposed to die," he spat. "I did," I replied coldly. "And I was reborn." In the weeks that followed, I worked tirelessly to undo the damage Julian had wrought. It was a Herculean task. The company was bleeding money, morale was shattered, and the press was having a field day. But I was a different CEO. The arrogant, detached leader was gone. I walked the floors, I talked to employees, I listened. I had learned the value of every single person who contributed to the whole. The story of my survival became legend, but I kept the details of Cedar Creek and Elijah to myself. That part of my life was sacred. Once the company was stabilized and a new, trustworthy executive team was in place, I knew what I had to do. I had one final piece of business. I flew back to Cedar Creek, not in a private jet, but on a commercial airline. I rented a simple car and drove to the familiar trailer. It was a bright spring day. Elijah was outside, tinkering with an old lawnmower engine. He looked up as I got out of the car. He squinted, not recognizing me at first in the clean, expensive suit. Then, his eyes widened. The recognition was slow, dawning not on the face of the billionaire, but on the soul of the man he had sheltered. "Al?" he whispered. "Hello, Elia," I said, smiling. He stood up, wiping his greasy hands on his pants. He looked from me to the rental car and back again. The pieces were clicking into place. The news of Alexander Croft's return had been everywhere. "My God," he said, his voice full of wonder. You're him. You're Alexander Croft." "I am," I said. "But I will always be Al, the man you shared your beans with." I explained everything, the betrayal, the escape, the fight to reclaim my life. He listened, shaking his head in amazement. "Elijah," I said when I was finished, "you saved me. Not just my life, but my soul. You taught me what it means to be a man. I can never repay you, but I'd like to try." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "What's this?" he asked, taking it cautiously. "An offer. The position of Vice President of Operational Integrity at Croft Global. It's a new role I've created. It requires a man of unwavering honesty, someone who understands the value of hard work and the importance of treating people with dignity. The salary is substantial, and there's a penthouse apartment in Manhattan with your name on it." Elijah stared at the envelope as if it were a live snake. His hands trembled. He looked from the offer to his rusty trailer, to his greasy hands, and then back to me. A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. "Me?" he croaked. "A vice president? Alex, I'm just an old handyman. I can't run a company. I can barely run this lawnmower." "You're wrong," I said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You run your life with more integrity than any executive I've ever known. You don't need to know balance sheets. I have people for that. I need you to be the company's conscience, to remind us every day that our greatest asset isn't our stock price, it's our people, just like you reminded me." The shock on his face was absolute. It was the look of a man who had been told he'd won the lottery without ever buying a ticket. It was the look of a man whose quiet, humble kindness was being rewarded on a scale he could never have imagined. He finally looked up at me, his eyes shining. "You're serious?" "I have never been more serious in my life." A slow, wondrous smile spread across Elijah's face. It was the smile of a man seeing a new world open up before him. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. Then he laughed, a rich, hearty sound that echoed in the quiet clearing. "All right, then. I suppose I'd better pack my overalls." A year later, I stood at the window of my office, looking down at the city. It was the same view, but I saw it with new eyes. Croft Global was not only restored, but was thriving, with a renewed sense of purpose and a commitment to ethical practices that was earning us praise and, more importantly, respect. The door opened, and Elijah walked in. He was wearing a well-tailored suit, but he still had the same gentle, honest eyes. He had taken to his new role with a natural grace. He didn't understand the complex financial instruments, but he understood people. He ate lunch in the cafeteria. He remembered employees' names. He listened to their concerns. He was the most beloved executive in the company. "The Sijin reps are here for the final signing, Alex," he said. "Thank you, Elijah." He came to stand beside me at the window. "Quite a view," he said softly. "It is," I agreed. "But the view from your old trailer wasn't so bad either. You could see the stars." He smiled. "That you could." We stood in comfortable silence. Two men from different worlds, bound by a betrayal and a kindness. The ledger of my life had been balanced, but not in the way I had ever expected. The assets were no longer just numbers in a bank account. They were the loyalty of a friend like Sarah, the second chance I'd been given, and the profound, life-altering gift of a poor man's shelter. Julian Vance was serving multiple life sentences in a maximum security prison. His empire of lies had crumbled to dust. And mine? It was no longer just an empire of steel and glass. It was built on a foundation that could never be betrayed or stolen. It was built on the memory of a shared bowl of soup in a rusty trailer, and the unshakable belief that the truest measure of a man's wealth is the kindness he gives and receives when he has nothing left.